30 days, 30 Asian ingredients, and we are doing rice today. And rice is something that, as an Asian, I guess, I grew up with. So I remember back in my little hometown in Malaysia, my parents used to buy the big sacks of rice. And nowadays, obviously, it's you really only buy big 25-kilo sacks of rice if you run a business like I do. But I know there's a lot of questions about it, things that I never even thought to cover, because it's true what some people say, like, you know, cooking rice for Asians, certainly ones growing up in Asian cultures, is kind of like second nature. But I just want to cover in terms of what rice I use, because I get asked that more often than you would realize. So for the record, if you're cooking my recipes and my type of cuisine, Malaysian, pretty much all the time, if you're cooking a savory dish, we use jasmine rice. Some people like to use basmati rice, and that's very healthy. I'm told that it's got a lower GI, so some people are starting to use basmati rice, but I personally don't use basmati rice unless I'm cooking an Indian dish like biryani or something like that. So likewise in Malaysia, if you were going to an Indian restaurant and you want to eat biryani, nasi biryani, or you want to eat Indian nasi lemak, you might get basmati rice, which is thinner. Because of the type of rice it is, you need more water to be able to cook it properly. Just something to keep in mind. But we're covering predominantly jasmine rice today. I've got some over here. Okay, jasmine rice. This is universally across the board. Any Asian kid growing up asking about how to cook rice from their mothers and that sort of stuff, they always get told the same thing. And if you're Asian and you got taught a different way, let me know, okay? But growing up in Malaysia, anywhere that I know, how much water do you put in rice, okay? Say this is like, I've got a Pyrex jug here with some rice in here. It is always, the amount of water you put in is always, the way you measure it, you have say a pot of rice and you fill it up with water, and then you stick your finger on the surface of the rice, not all the way down, on the surface of the rice, and the water needs to come up to the first line on your middle finger. Okay, that's how you measure how much water you use. And it's quite funny because recently I attended this event in Sydney, and I met this gentleman who's also from Malaysia, and he's actually a former Hindu priest. And he's now based in New York, and he teaches a lot of like courses along meditation and that sort of stuff. And he told me exactly the same thing, you know. He said one day my dad asked my mom, my dad was a scientist, he said my mom was a homemaker, how do you cook rice, how much water to put in? And she says, again, you know, that's how you measure it. Water up to the first line on your finger, right? And the dad, being a scientist, goes, but everybody's finger is different, and the amount of rice everyone's cooking might be different, and the size of the pots they're using could be different. But strangely, and I can vouch for that, it always seems to work. So if ever you're in doubt about how to cook rice, how much water to put in, again, you know, stick your finger in the pot and just have the tip of your finger just touching the surface of the rice, and bring the water up to the first line on your finger. How you cook rice, okay, and there's another anecdote I want to point out as well, is I was talking to a group of Malaysians around at a dinner table, and they were telling me how they were watching MasterChef Australia, and they were all supporting this Malaysian girl who was on one of the seasons. She was cooking rice, and every 30 seconds she was reaching the pot cover and opening up and looking in to see what was done. And collectively, all these Malaysians supporting her from home were screaming, "Stop opening the lid!" You know, because the way you cook rice, if you're Asian, right, is one of the fundamental rules is that you don't open the lid when you're cooking. You want all the steam to be contained within the pot. The way you want to cook rice is, you know, if you're cooking it on a stove, you don't have the luxury of a rice cooker. Rice cooker will solve all your problems, I promise you. It's a very, very good investment. And the other thing I need to point out as well with cooking rice is that it froths up, okay? So just be a little bit careful about how it froths up, sort of thing, because it can kind of like cause the spillage. So use a clear lid if you can, stick it on a stove, and what you do is turn on the heat on the stove to the max possible, and then bring the water to a boil, and then you turn it down to the lowest possible setting on your stove and keep the lid on. Let it simmer very, very gently for about 10 minutes or so, okay, and then turn off the heat completely but leave the lid on for another 5 minutes or so. It needs to, you know, it needs to do its thing. It needs to fluff up the rice. And the other thing I've got to mention about rice, unlike pasta, I know a lot of Italian purists like their pasta al dente. Rice, certainly jasmine rice should never be al dente. It should be nice, soft and fluffy. Another thing we were taught, there's a whole process with preparing rice for cooking. What you do first, you got to rinse it under cold running water, rinse it, stir it around, and then you tip out the water, and you basically clear out some of the starch and the dirt sort of thing. And then you rinse it a second time, you get a clearer, basically the water becomes a little bit clearer. And then it's only the third time you fill it up with water, that's the water you use for cooking the rice with. Okay, so that's cooking normal boiled rice. Now, as far as cooking coconut flavored rice, which is what we do a lot with Malaysian dishes, especially things like nasi lemak, what I like to do is just add some salt in the rice to kind of like bring out the flavor of the creaminess of the coconut a little bit. The coconut milk will tend to cause the rice to stick to the pot, okay, so it will burn a lot more easily. Something to keep in mind. What I tend to do to circumvent that to some extent is to cook the rice with water first. Okay, halfway through the cooking process, I'll use less water than what you would do if you were just cooking straight out boiled rice. Okay, use less water, and then what you want to do once you've lowered the heat is add the coconut milk in and let it sit on top. Don't stir it in yet. Just cover it quickly and let it kind of do its thing, soak through the rice. And then when the rice is nearly done, open the lid again and just stir it through and let it just kind of like absorb into the rice with the lid closed for another 5 minutes or so. That's how I would do coconut rice. If you were cooking coconut rice in large volumes, I actually personally prefer to steam it. Because in large volumes, even if you get a big 20-gallon or 20-liter pot, like I said, coconut does tend to burn rice very, very easily. So just keep that in mind. Do what I do, what I suggested anyhow. And the other way to circumvent getting your rice too gluggy if you're cooking coconut rice, and what you tend to do, because it burns so easily, you overcompensate. You add more liquid to it. You add more coconut milk or you add more water, and your rice becomes sticky and porridgey sort of thing, and you don't want that. So one way to circumvent this, as this is something that someone online actually suggested to me, is to use coconut milk powder. So powdered coconut. Give that a shot, and basically essentially what that eliminates is having to use anything that's too sticky or too starchy that will cause your rice to burn. So use the normal amount of water if you're using powdered coconut, and just pour that over the top. And that will help you with your coconut rice. And like I said, I prefer steaming rice if I'm cooking coconut rice in large batches. I used to, granted, when I had my restaurant, I used to have this big giant thing called a brat pan. It allows you to cook anything in 80-liter volumes. So what I would do is actually half fill it up with water and then stick like steamer baskets in there. Congee, the way I do it is, usually we use, you can use actually leftover cooked regular boiled rice, stick it back in the saucepan and add lots of water to it. And usually if you were cooking congee from start, you would add, I think a rough guide is about double the amount of water you would use for normal rice. And then you can add more water to it as well. If you're cooking congee, if you want a shortcut way, I would use chicken stock granules to give it the flavor, but otherwise use chicken stock. So there you go. I hope that's helped you towards your next attempt at cooking rice. Let me know if you've got any questions at all. Like I said, that tends to be the most common question. What type of rice do you use? Jasmine rice, that's, you know, sorted. Especially cooking coconut rice and that sort of stuff. This is how I would do it. Just cook it with like plain water first, and then just add the coconut milk halfway through the cooking process. Thanks for that, Stephen. Good question. Brown rice. No, I've never used brown rice. I love you too, Big Paul. Never used brown rice. I am, you know, brown rice I think came with the whole health movement and that sort of stuff. To some extent, I think, you know, well, certainly it may have changed in Malaysia ever since, but growing up in Malaysia, as a kid, we really didn't encounter brown rice. We encountered sticky rice. A lot of times sticky rice is used, it's quite regional. Northern states of Malaysia use more sticky rice than we do down south. Down south, we use sticky rice a lot of the time, mostly in sweets and desserts and that sort of stuff. Same with black glutinous rice. Usually we use it to make sweets. We use it to make porridgey thing that you pour coconut cream, coconut milk over. So these are a few things to keep in mind, but by and large, regular rice that our households grew up eating was just straight out jasmine rice, and most of the time it would have been boiled as opposed to steamed. Okay, there you go. Thank you guys, and I will see you tomorrow hopefully, and have a great rest of the day. Ciao.